We are on. Yes, we are on. Okay, a bit of a delay. Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can all tune in and everything's all good. I'll just probably leave it for a couple of minutes just to make sure that everyone can get on the stream and see the user count tick up. You know, everyone will be getting that notification if they've gone and set their subscription alerts on for our channel. You know, I'll do the usual streaming thing and say like and subscribe. We have 13 viewers. Thanks everyone who's already jumped in. We already have 2 likes. I appreciate that. Cool. So apologies. I'm going to be context switching a bit here. I'm going to be jumping between a few different screens just to try and coordinate everything here. Tonight's presenters are all connected and set up. We've got Josh Wolf, Dallas Clark, and Ashley Davis. They're going to be presenting to us tonight. And I'm just going to give it another minute. Everyone's ticking in. Okay. I'll start the preamble now. Okay, we are recording our stream as well, so we should be able to see this back in all its glory immediately after we finish the stream. And I'll kick it off with the usual intros. So what I'd like to start with here first is just saying thanks to PCCW Global. They have agreed to sponsor all our Zoom Pro account, and that's been obviously invaluable in trying to make sure that we continue broadcasting out to the world and continue to have these events as we go into COVID-19 lockdown. I hope everyone is doing well, that everyone is keeping safe and healthy, keeping away from nasty viruses, and that remote work finds you well. If you're looking for work, we've got some sections in this intro about just that. There's some positions going, there's some companies always seeking, and we've got a few different places to contact and go and see different contacts and different job boards and things like that. So I'll get started into that. If you didn't see on the stream before, we are using feedback mechanism. Obviously, there's the YouTube live chat, live streaming chat. Everyone watching at home is on kind of a 10-second delay, and that's just the buffering between Zoom and YouTube and then to you. So we're using this to be able to kind of, this Slido, to be able to grab feedback as people are presenting and not interrupt. That way, at the end of the talk, I'll be able to go and pull from that and then make sure those are ticked off and answered. People can upvote on that page and make sure that you can get the visibility if there's a flow of lots and lots of questions. Thank you to extra people who have just joined the stream. Welcome. And I will jump straight in after that. I've just left that up for as long as I can, just so you can grab the number. If you don't already have the link, it is in the description of the YouTube. We are also, we did actually publish that on the Meetup page as well. That's just a one click and you're in. Works really great on your mobile phone as well, which is kind of cool. That way you don't even have to context switch between Windows on your laptop or wherever you're enjoying this YouTube stream. If you don't know who I am, I'm sorry, I neglected to start with that. I'm Kevin van der Beeken. I've been organizing BrisJS for some time now, and thank you for joining us again. I usually give this intro and bore everyone to death for a few minutes before I get all the very interesting speakers up. And I try and do some of the housekeeping that we need to do as a meetup. One of the things that we started doing before we all went into lockdown was the acknowledgement of country, which is very important when we go through our actual events. But while you're all distributed, I think it's really worthwhile to go and find out the traditional owners of where you are. Pay respect to its elders, past and present. You know, we're all meeting virtually, and we'll increasingly do this as a nation, a connected nation of technologists as well. So it's worthwhile to understand the roots and heritage of the land. Thank you for using the RSVP function. Meetup likes to hide the YouTube stream link behind that. Obviously, if you're a subscriber, you get the notifications and the links anyway. So yeah, if you RSVP, it helps just to be able to understand how many people are attending these, and also, you know, get a feedback mechanism going there as well via Meetup. So if you want to join one of our streams, it's great if you can say that you're going to the RSVP through Meetup to say that you're going to be here. Just because, yeah, I'd like to see the numbers. It's good to know. Yeah, I'll also have some of the stats there on our YouTube channel. Now, code of conduct, super important for all of our events. This includes online. So if you're not familiar with the code of conduct for our events, have a look at brisjs.org/conduct. Make yourself familiar. We expect everyone to be able to, you know, make sure that this is a harassment-free space for everyone, virtual or otherwise. Call for presenters. Now, let me just make sure that, so I've realized that, of course, I'm not sharing my screen here. So you've just been staring at me instead. Okay, here we go. There's always got to be a hiccup every time I do this. There it is, everyone. So now I realize that folks may not have seen that. One last go at that particular one. Get on Slido. Okay, cool. So requesting a talk. I'm always keen for all your talk submissions. Everyone goes into our GitHub issues for curation. We basically just try and work out when you can present and try and get at least 3 speakers for this night. There's usually sort of a 20-minute short one and then a 20-minute, or we can have a headline, which is about a 30-minute with some questions. So we try and balance out the amount of content there and make sure that it doesn't drag on too much, but we still have a really full night of information for everyone. So yeah, submit that talk. If you're not sure exactly what to do, but you've still got this burning question, you're like, surely somebody knows about this in our community. You can always request that somebody else do a talk. They request a topic, say, has anyone done this? Has anyone looked at that? If you put that up there, I'll set the correct labeling on GitHub, and it'll actually appear on our website as a suggestion for somebody to speak for. So if you're not sure what to present either, those suggestions will come in sometimes as well. They're on the present link at brisjs.org, and then you can kind of go from there, interact with those GitHub issues and comment and have a discussion about that. And if you've got any questions about that, feel free to get in touch with me. I'm happy to facilitate all that stuff. This is an example of that. We tag it with a whole bunch of things. If you're not sure what's coming up before I've done the official announcement on Meetup or in socials, that'll be happening, and you can see what the schedule looks like per release tag we're using from GitHub there. And we've got various different socials there, of course, hopefully very familiar with those. This is the YouTube that you've obviously found. Twitter.com/brisjs, @brisjs is our handle. That's one of the most active ones. I do go and push the event onto Facebook now as well to make sure people get broadcast in our community there as well. And brisjs.org, which I was mentioning before, that's our website that we need to do a little bit of work on, but it will help pull in some of the info around what you can expect when we're presenting. Some of that information is about our physical events. Then there's a link to the jobs section there as well, which I'm about to come up with as well. Are you in need of a job? Yeah, we know that there's obviously been some trouble, some different troubling times going on in our community. Different companies have had different challenges and have let people go, but a lot of them are also hiring. So do get in touch or have a look at our job board, and yeah, so we go in and make sure that that the job board is up to date. This is also facilitated through GitHub. If you've got a job to present, please feel free to send that either to me directly or just go onto our jobs board link that you can see there in the GitHub repo. I'll tag it and it'll appear on this page. Just a shout out there for our latest one. The ABC News is looking for a senior product manager. That's obviously a massive opportunity there. So if you're in the product side of things, feel free to reach out to them, follow all the links that are there. You can also comment on the original post that's on there as well. We'll be able to get in touch and yeah, hopefully go from there. There's some links there to be able to follow up on what that role entails. There's some more in there as well. There's another dev role at ABC, and there's 3 senior JavaScript developers at Tiny. And we've got one of the folks from Tiny, Dallas Clark, is going to be presenting today as well. So he'll be able to give you some more information about that as well. Now, we don't go and provide the usual drinks and pizza virtually. I think that would be quite difficult, but we still really appreciate all the support up until the online events have started that we got from all of our sponsors. So PCCW Global has been awesome in helping me provide pizza to everyone. I work there. I've been going through many iterations of that company's life cycle when we were a startup and now acquired by PCCW Global. And so they've been looking for a whole bunch of people. So they've been looking for a release train engineer and senior and mid JS developers, some Java and Kotlin software engineers, system engineers. So any of those kinds of jobs, do feel free to get in touch with me directly. There's a link there about some of the open positions from the actual site from them. That'll go to the LinkedIn board that they have there as well. But feel free to get in touch with me and I'll just send you direct to the HR manager there in Brisbane. Auto in General, they were the awesome venue that we were always setting everything up for us, getting all the chairs out and everything else. They're always looking for JavaScript and Java devs. So if you're keen on that, feel free to reach out to me and I can get you in touch with the right people as well. Just Digital People have been supporting us forever, doing drinks. Contact Kirsten if you're in need, like even after all of these different things that we've put out, the jobs board and the links and stuff. If you're interested and you need a position, these guys can definitely help. Yeah, thanks very much to their support. We got some other folks coming on board to try and sponsor, to give away some licenses to some different tools. So it was a bit last minute. I only arranged it with them today. They reached out and sort of said, "Hey, how about we give out some stuff?" So that's the folks from Quokka.js and what is it? What's the other one? Oh God. Testing my knowledge. End of the day, pretty hard. I'll do a shout out at the end of this as well because I'm gonna prepare a bit of a giveaway here. I'll try and do that. We'll try and do a giveaway online and get somebody in need a license to their awesome tools. Yeah, so tonight, without further rambling, so we've got the Fun with Babel and ASTs in JavaScript by Ashley Davis. And then we're going to jump into 5 lessons from refactoring Stack Overflow code. It's a bit of a mouthful. That's Josh Wolf coming back in there for that one. And Agile 101 is going to be led by Dallas Clark. And just, how you can go and work with all these other folks even in this distributed environment. So, then we'll go and spend a little time, leave open the stream, and have a feedback mechanism from Slido there, just so we can have some polls and get some of your thoughts about how well we did tonight. And that will be there. And okay, so without further ado, I will stop streaming there. And I will just ask Ashley Davis to jump on. There he is.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. Welcome. Thanks very much for submitting this talk, and I'll just hand over to you now.
Well, thank you, Kevin, for continuing to run this meetup, even though we can't meet physically at the moment.
It's my pleasure.
And hi to everyone out there. My name is Ashley Davis. I'd like to welcome you to my home office. So this isn't a virtual backdrop. This is actually where I work most days. Even before the virus hit, I work from home quite a lot. And that said, I hope everyone out there is okay. Like these are pretty difficult times. And I hope everyone's doing okay and just kind of holding in there until we can kind of hopefully sometime soon, get back together face to face and have this meetup in person again. That'd be great. So I'm the CTO of a startup called Sortle. I'm also the developer of my own product called Dataforge Notebook. I'm the author of 2 books, Data Wrangling with JavaScript and Bootstrapping Microservices. Tonight, I'm going to talk to you about something I learned recently. So about Babel. So Babel is a JavaScript compiler. It's a very popular one. And I don't actually use it. So normally in my coding, I would use TypeScript, and I'll use the TypeScript compiler, not the Babel compiler. But I do use Babel inside my product, Dataforge Notebook, to compile basically code that users have in their notebooks. I'll show you an example of that in a second. And I recently found myself wanting to do something more sophisticated with the compilation pipeline. So I learned how to create custom Babel plugins. So that's just a little snippet of JavaScript code that basically you can inject into your compiler pipeline. And you can do heaps of interesting stuff there. And it's a lot about how Babel works as well. So Babel provides you with a plethora of basically plugins for doing all sorts of JavaScript features and compiling them back to backward compatible JavaScript code. And you can write your own JavaScript code that basically just fits into that pipeline, and you can use it to modify code and add your own features to languages even. It can be that much. So at the end, I'm going to show you what I did with my custom plugin, like the end result of the code that I wrote. That's a little bit complicated to start with, so we're not going to start with that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a little bit of background as to why I needed this and what I'm going to use it for. And then I'm going to give you a demo of Babel. So for people who haven't seen Babel before, I'll give you a quick demo so you can get an idea of how to use it and what it can do for you. And then I'm basically going to show you how I learned to write custom plugins. So it's not as hard as you might think. They got some great documentation, and I'll give you some resources. I'll put some resources up on meetup.com as well, so anyone else who wants to follow up on this later can. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen now so everyone can see what I'm doing. Cool. So this is the landing page for Dataforge Notebook. I've actually got some big news to announce tonight. So I've been developing this project on the side of normal contracting, startup work and stuff that I do. I've been developing it for about 2 years now. So it's gotten pretty sophisticated, but I'm now gearing up to release a free version of it. So I'm keen to see who's interested in that. If you are interested, I'm going to give a demo in a second. Please jump on the landing page here. It's dataforgenotebook.com. And if you give me your email address, I'll send you an email when the free version is ready to go. It's going to be in the next couple of months. Also, at the end of this page, you can find my email address and my Twitter handle if you want to get in touch and have a chat. Cool. So this is the web page for Babel. So as I said, Babel is a JavaScript compiler. Great documentation, and it's really easy to set up and use. If you follow through to the setup page here, you can basically pick how you want to use Babel, and it'll give you really good instructions on how to set it up. So this is basically just how I learned this. I'm going to show you this again a bit later, but this is the Babel plugin handbook. So this was really, really handy to kind of learn the basics of how to put it together. And I'm basically, for the simple example that I want to give tonight, just to show how easy this is to do, I'm just going to basically give a summary of what's in this. So, I mean, it's quite a long document, but I'll give you the cut down version of that as quickly as I can. Actually, I'm just going to set a timer because I don't want to go too over time on this. I want to keep this quite short. So I'm going to just give you a bit of background. So this is a notebook in Dataforge Notebook. It's basically markdown cells interspersed with JavaScript code. If you know Jupyter Notebook, this is basically like Jupyter Notebook, but for JavaScript. You can get some pretty interesting visualizations, like you can preview tabular data, a couple of examples here. You can do charts with this fairly easily. And one of the latest features is maps. So you can do kind of map-based visualizations here as well. And I can run the code here by running this entire notebook, or I can run each code cell individually. So this is a great way to prototype JavaScript code and visualize what you're doing at the same time. So I've got a simple example that kind of demonstrates what I wanted to do with my plugin. So this is an example JavaScript notebook with two cells. The first cell here, we've got two variables. We're printing out X using the display function. It's all asynchronous aware. So I've said just for the purpose of an example, I'm doing a set timeout. So after 1 second here, we're basically going to reset the X variable to an array. And then there's another code cell here that just displays X. So if I just run this fresh, you can see when I run the whole notebook, I get 1 printed out here in the output. So that's from that display X. And over here, I get 1 printed out in the second cell. So it's run it like an entire JavaScript, like just one JavaScript file, basically. I can run this, this cell by itself. This time it produces a different result. So you can see it's printed out an array. And that's because in the asynchronous code here, like basically like a second after we started it, we've set this X to 1, 4, 10, like an array of values. So what I had to do here to make this work was basically to run code in the compilation pipeline that would extract these variables and the values of these variables at certain times. So it does it after the code cell has run, and it also does it after all asynchronous operations for a code cell is done as well. So it captures that value. And the benefit of this is that then you get to kind of rerun, you can run your whole script, your whole notebook, and then you can run individual cells and actually reuse the variables that were captured. This is quite an advanced use case. I'm actually going to show you what that notebook looks like in JavaScript code now. So I've just sort of set up this example previously. I'm just going to show you it in Visual Studio Code. Oops. Let's just do that. Okay, so on the left here, basically, you see the code from the notebook, basically just smashed together in a JavaScript file. So that's the code for the first cell. That's the code for the second cell. Now on the right here, you can see the generated code. So basically, I've wrapped this whole thing up in JavaScript that I can compile. I can actually put this through Babel. And I'll show you the compiled version of it in a moment. But you see that I've wrapped each cell here in its own function, and that's how I can get async await to work. We've got the code for cell 1, and we've got the code for cell 2. And you can see that I've injected some extra functions here, capture locals. That's capture locals for the first cell. This is capture locals for the second cell. Now, what I'm doing here is basically, you can see this object here. What I want to do as part of the compilation pipeline is to magically take these variables up here, the X and the Y, and inject them down here. So I've got a little kind of mechanism that's kind of generated into the code to be able to capture the values of variables as the code is running. And now I'm going to show you let me just rearrange this a bit. I'm going to show you the compiled version of it. So now on the left, we've got the generated code with capture locals. And after putting it through Babel with my custom plugin, you can see here that it's automatically captured the names of the local variables and their values so that basically they can be recorded in memory to be used later. So I apologies if you're not following. This is probably quite an advanced use case, but I'm gonna break it down to something simpler now, hopefully. So the first thing I'm going to do basically now, let's just reset to something real simple, right? I'm just going to show you the real absolute basics of how you go about using Babel and compiling some JavaScript code for it. So I've got this JavaScript project here. You can see I've got just a real simple script here that's got a hello world in it. I've got this as an async function. And now the only reason I'm really doing that, because I'm not making use of async here. The only reason I'm doing that here is so that I can kind of show you what Babel does to this. So async, of course, isn't available in many old browsers or old versions of Node.js, say. And one of the things you can do with Babel is basically backward compile to an older version of JavaScript that has all that basically factored out, so that you can run this code on an older platform. Now, to use Babel, first things you're going to do is basically install the Babel CLI. That means we can basically run compile our JavaScript code on the command line. There's the Babel core, so that contains the the parser, the compiler, all that kind of stuff, just wrapped up in that. And then there's this thing called Babel preset env. So that's a preset environment. It's basically a collection of plugins that implement the JavaScript ES15 standard, I think. So there's a whole bunch of plugins. I don't know how many, but there's a whole bunch of different plugins that basically make up that standard. And if you install this one package, you basically get all that in one go. Now, what we've got here is the Babel RC, or the Babel configuration file. So this is fairly minimal, but all it's saying here is that we want to include that preset. So that's what basically configures the compiler for us. Now, back in package.json, we've got a build script here. So this is where we're actually running Babel. And it's basically saying to compile code in our source directory to a dist directory. I'm going to run this now just to show you what it does. I've actually got a dist directory here that I generated earlier. I'm just going to delete that so I can show you it working from scratch. And I'll do npm run build. So this is taking that index.js now, and it's compiled it into another file. So I'll just take this out so we can kind of compare side by side. So we've got the original index.js. We've got our console log on the left here, and you can see where that is on the right here. Now, there's a lot more code on the right here. So you can see that, I've added this async keyword. That's generated a lot of kind of old-fashioned, say, JavaScript code there that can basically run that for us on old browsers and old versions of Node.js. So this is what the compiler does for us. It allows us to basically use all the latest, greatest features of JavaScript, but we can compile that into a version that we can run pretty much anywhere. So hopefully this is all making sense so far. Before we can look at how to make a custom plugin, we do need to cover a little bit of compiler theory. Let's make this pretty quick. So I've been a developer for over 20 years, and I've been a compiler nerd from way back in the early days. I loved understanding how compilers worked, and I studied it at university, and I've made a couple of hobby compilers over the years. I was just looking at the definition of abstract syntax tree on Wikipedia. So this is the main thing that you have to understand for what I'm showing you tonight, is what an abstract syntax tree is. Also known as an AST for short. But if you're interested in this stuff, this sounds interesting, please have a look at this on Wikipedia. I basically pinched their graphic to use to try and have a go at explaining what this means. So an abstract syntax tree is a data structure that represents like a formatted version of your code in memory. So when you run a parser, which is a part of a compiler, it's going to take that raw code file and it's going to turn it into something that looks a bit like this tree here. And you can see in this example here down the bottom, we've got a bit of pseudocode there. That's not JavaScript. I don't really know what that language is, or it's probably just kind of a pseudocode language. But this is meant to represent, this tree is a data structure that basically represents that code. And of course, the reason that we do this, if you're working in sort of compilers, the reason you do this is because it's a lot easier to work with a tree data structure than it is to work with a raw source code format. So the process of parsing basically turns your raw code into a data structure like this, and it's a lot easier to manipulate, to modify, to extend, to make changes to than it would be if you were trying to, if your code was trying to modify a source file directly. So what I'm going to be showing you with Babel is that Babel gives this really amazing JavaScript parser, and you can only really appreciate it probably if you've tried to write a parser yourself, because it's pretty difficult, pretty time consuming, there's a lot of code in it, but you get a really great JavaScript parser built into Babel. And then all you really have to do is put in the code that does whatever you want to do to this tree. So you can have then, processing code within your compilation pipeline. And it gives you so much power to extend your build pipeline, your build process, things like that. So hopefully that abstract syntax trees didn't really go over anyone's head too far. I'm going to show you an example in code now, and you'll see that when you actually see this working, hopefully it'll make a lot more sense. So I've actually prototyped this code previously in Dataforge Notebook. So I've got an example notebook that comes with Dataforge Notebook. This is the JavaScript parsing example. So I'm just going to use it as my cheat sheet, but I'm going to go through this and just pull out each individual bit of code so I can kind of explain it as we go. I'm going to do this through Dataforge Notebook, but I mean, this is just regular Node.js code. So I'm just using Dataforge Notebook because it's a good demonstration of Dataforge Notebook and because it makes it a little bit easier for me. So to start with, we need some code. And actually this comes from the Babel plugin handbook. So you can see here that I'm just using basically the function that they provided. So this is a simple JavaScript function that can, square a number and return the result. So I've defined that as a string in JavaScript here, and that's the code that I want to put through the Babel parser. So I'll just find my cheat sheet here, and I'll just get the next bit of code that I want to copy across. Oops. So what I'm doing here is I'm importing Babylon from the Babylon NPM library. So Babylon is the parser that powers Babel. So it's like what we're looking at here is not Babel per se. I'm showing you now some of the lower level libraries that actually power Babel. So Babylon has this parse function. So all we need to do is give it some code. You can see that. And then what we get in return is our abstract syntax tree or our AST. Now I'd actually love to be able to show you something that looks like this diagram here, but I mean, this would be pretty tricky to generate. So what I'm going to show you is going to look more like JSON data, I guess. I'm just going to run this notebook. So you can see here in the output for this cell, we've got an abstract syntax tree. We've got the root of the tree. There's a file node. Under the file node is a program node. We've got the body of the program here, the function declaration. So the function declaration here is going to be the declaration of that square function I just showed you. So under function declaration, we've got an identifier, and that is the name of that identifier is square. So that identifies the square function that we're declaring. We've got parameters here, parameters to the function, the body of the function here. So that's a block statement. Under here, we've got a return statement. And then what we're returning is the result of a binary expression. On the left-hand side of that expression, we've got an identifier called n. And then the operator we're using here is multiply. So we're basically doing n by n here. So on the right of this equation, we've got another identifier n. So this is what represents the program in memory. And I mean, this looks pretty complicated, right? It's a pretty small JavaScript function, but it generates this massive data structure. And you can imagine what this would look like if you put like an entire JavaScript file or an entire JavaScript program through your compiler. And you can imagine this tree would get pretty huge. So now we've got the abstract syntax tree in memory. We can make some changes to it. So now we're going to be making use of the traverse function from the Babel traverse library. So we're traversing this tree. We're using what's called a design pattern called the visitor pattern here. So into the traverse function, we're passing our tree. And this is a special kind of format that you get to use with this library. And you could just pass in a function here as well, and it would execute that function for every node in the tree. But what we're doing here is saying, I'm only interested in identifiers. And then within that function, we're going to make a modification to the tree. So if we see an identifier named N, we're going to replace it with an identifier named X. So this is pretty simple stuff. We're just basically, in our compilation pipeline, we're basically changing the name of a variable. So pretty simple stuff, but you could imagine if you were like writing an IDE, like Visual Studio Code or something like that, this could actually be the starting point of like a refactor rename function, something like that.
Hey,
So
just to interrupt, Ashley, can you enlarge the text size? We're only running 720p on YouTube, unfortunately. That will be a lot better. Yeah, I think so. Thank you.
Great, cool. I can make all this code available on GitHub as well, if anyone wants to look at it later.
Awesome.
So the last bit of this particular part of the demo is using the Babel generator. So we're using the generate function from this other low-level Babel library. And all we're doing is we're passing the AST into this function, and it's going to generate JavaScript code back for us. So I'm going to run this now. And the expectation is that we're going to have changed our code using this procedural technique. So you can see on the output here, we've got a square function that takes an X parameter and it returns X by X. Now, if we just revisit the start of this notebook, you can see that the original function was taking an N parameter and returning N by N. So this is just a nice little way to kind of prototype some code to learn how to, to learn how to parse JavaScript code, to learn how to traverse and modify an AST, and to generate JavaScript code back from it. For this to be more generally useful, though, you then have to kind of wrap this in a Babel plugin. I'm going to show you how to do that now. I'm just opening another Visual Studio Code project that I prepared earlier. Now, this is exactly the same as the kind of the first example that I showed you, right? We've got Babel installed in our package.json. We've got a build script here. We've got an index.js. It's got, instead of having hello world, though, it's printing out a squared number. So you can see the square function here. And we're calling the square function here, and then we're just printing the value of it. And I'll show you that during the compilation process, basically we can kind of rewrite this square function to have that X instead of an N. Now, my plugin is in this subdirectory here. Hopefully everyone can see this. So my Babel plugin. So normally if you've used a Babel plugin that someone else has provided for you, you've probably installed that from NPM, and you've basically wired it in as an NPM module. But this is a way that you can basically wire in a custom plugin within any project. You don't even need to publish it. So it's a great way to experiment and to get it right, and just to use it privately if you want. You don't even have to publish these things, obviously. So the way we wire that in is through the Babel RC. So you can see here that in my Babel configuration file, I've added a list of plugins now. You could have as many plugins as you want. And I've referenced my Babel plugin using /. So basically it's a relative path to my plugin in this local directory. Now, if it looked like that, it would have to be like an NPM module. It would have to be installed through NPM. But because I'm referencing it as a subdirectory, I just have that plugin basically included in this project. Now let's look at the code for that. So this code is very similar to what I just showed you. We're defining a visitor here that's going to visit every identifier in the abstract syntax tree, and it's going to check if there's an N, it's going to replace it with an X. Now, this is just a normal JavaScript function. It's kind of like a factory function for the plugin. So it gets called with this Babel object here. We're not actually really making use of that in this simple plugin. But it's got like the APIs that you need there for doing, traversals, all sorts of other stuff that's useful when you're writing a plugin. But all we need to do here is basically just return this object. It specifies the visitor and it walks the abstract syntax tree, and it does this conversion for us. So I ran the build process for this earlier, and it generated this file. And so you can see the compiled version of our square function basically works with the name X now. So again, a pretty trivial example, but a lot of really advanced stuff in Babel is implemented using plugins that look a bit like this. And I think I'm ready now to show you what my final plugin looked like. So I'm just going to make this smaller for a moment just so you can see the whole thing in its entirety. So this is my custom Babel plugin that lives inside Dataforge Notebook that is capable of finding this function called capture locals. It walks backward through the AST to find variable declarations, and then it generates like a JavaScript object expression that can basically capture all the names and the values of these local variables. Now I'll zoom in again a bit so we can look through this. This is actually TypeScript code, right? So this is TypeScript code that gets compiled to a JavaScript plugin for Babel. So we've got some kind of TypeScript imports up here for importing type declarations and that kind of things. And you'll see some, TypeScript typing throughout this. So TypeScript's really good for this kind of thing as well, because you get all the static types for the whole Babel API, and it makes it a lot easier to discover what's available and what you've got there to work with. So what I'm doing here is we're returning a visitor to walk an abstract syntax tree of whatever is being compiled. So at this point, it's very general, right? So whatever is being compiled, Babel is going to run this traversal and this visitor on it. We're looking for call expressions, and there's a bit of a qualifier here that the calls we're looking for are calls to the function capture locals. And then this chunk of code here, it's basically using some Babel APIs to walk backward through the AST, the abstract syntax tree for this entire program, and find all the variable declarations that are on the same level as the call to capture locals. And what it's doing is it's basically here, it's just storing the name of each variable in an array. And then we've got a nested traversal here. So we're doing another traversal here, but this time underneath the call to capture locals. So we're looking for the object expression, or the JavaScript object expression that is being passed to capture locals. And then we're modifying that. So we're modifying that so that it passes in, the names basically and the values of the local variables. So, this is a fairly advanced use case. I'm sure there's plenty more advanced plugins than this, and you can see all the code for these things on GitHub as well. So there's great stuff out there for you to look at. Let me just remind you though of what the end product looked like. So what we're doing here is we're taking this code on the left. We're compiling this code on the left here through Babel. It's looking for capture locals. When it does that, it's walking backwards through the AST, picking out the variable declarations, and then it wants to populate them basically into this object expression right here. And so you can see the result of that on the right here, and this is the compiled file. So that's where it's injected the names and the values of the local variables. So that's about all I've got for you tonight. I'm going to unshare my screen now, and happy to take some questions if there's any.
Thanks very much, Ashley. That's awesome. There are a few questions.
How do I unshare my screen?
You hover over the particular screen that's being shared, and there should be a thing that appears on the bottom or the top of that screen.
Oh yeah, got it. Cool.
You got it. Awesome. Cool. So let me just dive into the Slido feedback here. We've got 3 questions. The first one there is there any way to graphically visualize the AST that Babel evaluates?
Not that I know of, although I really do want to find that. So if I do find something like that, I'll probably tweet about it. But so far, you know, I Googled for ASTs and images of ASTs so I could show you something. And all I could find was like sort of handcrafted visualizations, nothing that was automatically generated as far as I can tell. Yeah.
Well, something that could read that JSON format that you demoed for us would be really interesting. So I'd say it's definitely something you can do, depending on what the use case is that people are chasing here.
The thing about that as well is that those ASTs get pretty complicated pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So, you know, actually making a meaningful visualization out of it could actually be quite difficult.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
if you just take any random JavaScript file from your code and do that, like it's just going to be a huge mess, a huge graphical mess, unless someone's sort of gone in and cleaned it up. One thing you should look at, I don't think it's a visualization, but there is something out there. I'll put a link up to it later. It's called the Babel plugin playground, where you basically you get to type some code. There's a version of this for TypeScript as well as, actually, if you're interested in TypeScript. So you can type a bit of TypeScript code. You get to visualize like a kind of a JSON version again of the AST. But it also can show you, like, you know, you can type in a little plugin and you can see what the compiled output is like. And that's a great way to experiment with Babel as well. I'll put a link up later.
Sounds good. Next question is, does everyone use Babel? Should it be used for every project? Is there an alternative, or is Babel the only build parser for JS?
No, there's a bunch of these things out there. But personally, I didn't use anything. Like one of the things I loved about JavaScript when I first started working with it is that you didn't need a build process or a compiler or anything like that, and it felt very liberating. But, you know, eventually, you know, doing more and more professional stuff in JavaScript, and, you know, having a background in C++ and C# and these typed languages, you know, TypeScript, you know, ended up really appealing to me because I could take a bit of, you know, the dynamism of JavaScript and mix and match that with static typing, you know, as I saw fit. So I love working with TypeScript, and normally I use the TypeScript compiler, which, you know, it seems very popular as well, but Babel is just fantastic. Like it's, you know, they're up to version 7 or 8 or something like that. So it's pretty mature. It's pretty stable, great documentation, heaps and heaps of code for plugins available. So, you know, apparently you can do TypeScript and Flow through Babel as well. It's just different combinations of plugins. It's really powerful.
There you go. So that leads into the other question. Does the TypeScript compiler support the custom transformations like this too? So I'm assuming then you can go the Babel route.
Yeah, not that I've seen. So I've done this same kind of thing with TypeScript, and it's really painful. Like TypeScript is a great language to work with, but working with the compiler API, you're going to find yourself looking at a lot of complicated TypeScript code. They don't have very good documentation. You know, you'll probably find yourself like I did, you know, talking to other people on the internet who've worked with the TypeScript compiler, asking them how they did it, getting examples from them and stuff like that. Babel's a breeze compared to that. Like I recommend, in fact, in DataForge Notebook for version 2, I'm tempted to rip out the TypeScript compiler and replace it with Babel, but with TypeScript plugins. So it's just been really nice to work with, you know.
Sounds great. So the last question that I've got here is, so you are saying we can do data analysis with Babel?
Well, I wouldn't quite say that. What I'd say is that you could do data analysis with JavaScript. I mean, that's been my thing for quite some time. You know, Babel's a compiler. Like, you know, it'll take your language from kind of modern JavaScript and basically compile it so that you can use it basically in all the old browsers, old versions of Node.js, stuff like that. You always get to stay on the cutting edge of JavaScript if you're using Babel. But that in itself is nothing to do with data analysis. I mean, that's just something that I tend to do. Obviously, you can use JavaScript for anything these days. It comes from the web, but Node.js came along. It was server. You can write mobile programs using JavaScript now. I've been pushing data analysis and transformation stuff in JavaScript. Of course, JavaScript's always been great for doing interactive web visualizations. You can use JavaScript for anything, and Babel's there basically just to support you. It's not required, not necessary. It's just there to support you if you see value in it.
Absolutely, yeah, important distinction to make. Thanks very much. Well, that's all the questions that we've got tonight.
Cool, awesome. Thanks so much.
Add the applause. Awesome sauce. Okay. Now, if I just jump into a super quick screen share. There we go. So back to our list here, we've got our next speaker, Josh Wolf, who's going to be going through 5 lessons from refactoring Stack Overflow code. Take it away, Josh, if you're there.
Hey, what's up? My name is Josh Wolf, as seen on the internet at joshwolf.com. I'm literally a floating head on the internet right now. This is the Remarkables in Queenstown, shot at night by someone with a great camera, obviously. So let me see if I can share my screen with you. Screen share. I'm not sure how this is going to look because I got like this mega big monitor. Share. How's that? Can you see that? Well, whether you can see it or not, let's just keep rolling on. So here's my website, joshwolf.com. And on here, I have this series that I'm going to be talking about Stack Overflow. A little bit about me. I work for a company called Camunda. We're a process automation company. And I work particularly as a developer advocate on the ZB workflow engine for microservices orchestration. That's the part I work on. And I'm also the maintainer of the ZB Node.js client. So this is Stack Overflow where people ask these questions, right? And, I've been on Stack Overflow for a bunch of years, but it's become more popular. More people are using it. I logged in one day and I noticed that my ranking in the world had dropped to an unacceptable level because I like to win. So I spent some time answering some questions on there. You can see exactly where it happened. I'm in the top 0.6% in the world winning at the moment. For this year, and you can see the moment where it happened, right? I log in one day, my 1,448 karma points is no longer enough to keep me in the elite, so I just go nuts here and then raise it up, to 3,260. So you can see the period where I did it right here, this like massive jump. And then there's this long tail effect that happens after you answer questions where people, find them later answering their questions and give you an upvote. So it just kind of gradually builds over time. But this was just like this point where I hammered it. Now, the thing about doing a huge amount of kind of data collection or data analysis or, just answering all these questions is that patterns kind of start to emerge. So what I did is I created some articles about it here on my website in a category called Stack Overflowed. Now, in this Stack Overflowed category, it's a series of posts where I refactor code from Stack Overflow questions with a discussion of the changes. Now, as Ashley was pointing out, one of the great things about JavaScript is how scalable it is. You can start with nothing, just a blank editor, no compilation step. You can even just do it in your console, in your browser, and start writing. It's the dynamism of JavaScript that, Ashley said he found so liberating, and probably many of you have had that experience. Now, the thing is that, again, as Ashley was saying, you get to a certain point of like development where you need to start adding in things like modules, like, compilation, type checking, unit test, that kind of stuff. So the refactorings that I was doing in these posts are not really the question the person asked. They're like, I just need to ship this thing. I need to get it out. And I can't figure out why my thing is not working. They just want the smallest fix they can possible. They don't want someone to say, actually, here's a better way to do it. And you know what? It works the way it is. So good luck to them. Just leave it like that. So it's not really appropriate for me to put that into the Stack Overflow answer. So I would answer their question and then write it into these posts. One last thing about that, can't remember who said it, but he said that there's no such thing as good writing, only good editing. And so for code, the way I look at that is there's no such thing as good coding, only good refactoring. So I jumped onto Stack Overflow, like literally minutes before we started, and just scrolled down. Like the third question down here is like really encapsulates all of the 5 things that I'm going to show you. So I pulled it out, and we're going to be working on that. And then in the time period since then, there have been 79 questions with new activity in the JavaScript tag on Stack Overflow. But like 80% of questions in Stack Overflow are covered by these 5 things that I'm going to show you. So I hope that everything looks okay with the screen. Why don't I just take a look at myself in the stream to see what my screen looks like?
Just probably enlarge the text if possible. We're going to struggle on 720.
Oh, it's what is it doing? It is starting from the beginning when I try to watch the stream. Okay, so let's go back here. Here's the question. How is that massive, huge, embiggened? Okay, array of promises and a promise array. I have an array which contains books data. I have to loop in the array, make a service call to fetch details of each book, and each book data has IDs of attachments associated to the book, and make a service calls to fetch the associated attachments for each book. Pretty standard kind of problem space that you're in JavaScript, right? Asynchronous, you've got to fetch things from remote services, then you've got to make some determinations based on what you fetched, and then maybe fetch some more stuff back, and then you need to return the aggregated result of all of that logic to the caller of the function. Now, one of the things here that's implicit right at the very beginning is he or she starts off by saying, I have an array which contains books data, and then immediately thinks I have to loop an array. That's immediately how people think. Oh, I have to loop over the array and do something to all of the different elements in the array. We're going to get to that next. First, what we're going to look at is, let's take a look at the code here, which I have dumped into demo.js over here. So let me pull this across so we can take a look at it. I'll make it bigger because we're at 720p. We don't need the terminal so much. Okay, well, that's real big. Now, readme.md, 0, let versus var versus const, okay? So if we have a look at the demo code, in here you can see that this programmer has mixed let and const in here. Now, I found many programmers just like using let, const, var, like interchangeably with no kind of logic or anything to it. So it used to be that there was just var, everything was a variable. Then in ES6, they introduced this idea of constants, which were immutable, and either immutable values or immutable references, and also let, which is like a scoped variable. Now, in this case, the programmer is using let in some places and const in others. And, you know, you might look around on the internet and say, should I use let, var, or const? Here's the thing, like const indicates to both the interpreter, the runtime, also to any kind of compilation or tool chain that you have that's like linting your code in your editor. It indicates that this value or this reference will not change during the execution of the program. And it also indicates that to programmers, which means you and also other people reviewing your code. Now, if you assign a value and you don't change that value throughout your program, you should definitely use const, because if you use let or var, 2 things can happen. Number one, anyone who's trying to read your code is going to have to examine all of the code to see whether that actually mutates anywhere. The second thing is that you can accidentally mutate it somewhere else, reuse the variable name without declaring it, like anything, you know, like those kind of bugs can happen. That's the first thing. So in this case, we can see that this reference A promises is never reassigned. And it's a kind of a common misconception for beginning programmers that if I'm going to add anything to an array, if I'm going to put any elements inside the array, I need to make the array a variable. But that's not how arrays or objects work in JavaScript. It's actually a reference to a memory location. So we're never going to point this A promises to another memory location. It's always going to be to one place. So you can make that a constant. Same thing down here. I think this is the misconception that this program is operating under because they've done it with the arrays. Here they've done const. Now in here, they assign this field name to a key, and that's just a constant. Now, the other thing is that really, I say, don't use variables at all. There's only one situation where you actually need to use a variable, right? So I'm going to jump to, here's let var const. This is the article where I talk about it. I'll push this repo live on GitHub and you can check it out. So this one's called shun the mutant. Don't use mutation. This next one is about avoiding global state. And the thing about variables is that they actually represent state. So let's have a look at this one here. Like this was a let before, so it was a variable. Let the field name equal the key. That's a value. It's not actually a variable. If you think about your program as modeling something in the real world, like a customer is not a variable. Like John Smith, the customer, does not suddenly turn into Jane Doe, you know, like from 1 minute to the next. Now, John Smith might change his name, but, you know, in that case in your system, you're going to have something like a name change record or usually, or, you know, write something to a database. But in memory, when you bring that record out of the database, you have John Smith, the customer record. And that's not a variable. It's a value. In your programs, there are some things that are legitimately variables. Things like the time, things like the state of the network, is it connected or disconnected? Like that's actually a thing that can actually change its value, right? But in your program, what you want to do is you want to get all of that kind of state and put it in a single place. Like if you have to examine the network connection, you would have one place in your program where it was actually a variable. And it's kind of going to be something like an event listener that when you get like an event from the network saying, I disconnected, you would then flip the variable. So, you know, you do something like this. You would go, like, it would be something like, you know, network on disconnect like this. So on your network disconnect, you would have, let's say connected equals false, right? Now, what you do with this kind of one-liner like this is you stick it in, you can either do that or you can have those curly braces. So here we would do let connected, right? Equals, I don't know, false. Let's say that it's false to begin with. False. And then we're going to do on the network connected, we're going to change the value. Connected equals true. But the thing is that this should never be able to be modified by anything outside of these event handlers. Like you want a readable value for the rest of your program, right? So in that case, what you would do is you would have a function called get network connected, right? This, and then here you would return the value of connected like that. So now you don't have global mutable state. So somewhere else in the program, in fact, everywhere else. And then here's actually how you'd do it if you're doing it in the browser, right? You'd say const get network connected equals so it's a okay, yeah, I'm gonna have to do it twice. So anyway, here we're going to return a function. And then like this, save it. Okay, so get network connected is, and we need to here return a function. So we're gonna have to use an anonymous immediately invoked function expression, right? So we go here and then we just immediately invoke it like that. Now, let me just check that I got this right. So we invoke this function, it creates this closure, it returns another function that when you call it returns connected. Yeah. So if I now go get network connected, it should tell me it returns a Boolean. Yep. So there you go. So now I have a function that returns the value of whether it's connected or not. It's read only. So there's no global mutable state. There is a state machine in here that manages the state of the application's network connectivity. It has a variable in it, but this thing is like super tightly scoped to a state machine. Whenever you're using a variable, if you actually have to, you literally use a variable, like you just convert everything to const, everything, rewrite all your code to make it const. Anything that's left at the end of that is a legitimate variable, and it means it's a state machine. It's part of a state machine, and then you isolate those out of your code. Okay, so that's the second thing, global mutable state. Now, this is the third thing, and that's loops. Now, the thing about this is a loop is literally a state machine, because there's no way you can extract this into a value. You actually have to have a mutable reference in here, a mutable value. So that is an indication that there is, it's not that there's something wrong with it, although I would say there's something wrong with it. What it is that state and state mutation is one of the causes of complexity in your program. So here, he's constructing a custom state machine to solve this problem. This here is a custom state machine to solve the problem. So before he had one problem, how do I get this data and return it? Now he has two problems. How do I get this data, he or she? How do I get this data and return it? And now, how do I manage my state machine? So the state machine increases the complexity of the problem space that you're solving. There's actually no need for a state machine here. JavaScript has built into it state machines for data transformations, right? So do away with loops. Loops are such a low-level construction. They're good for like C if you need like huge amounts of performance or memory, you know, like optimization. But for the general classes of problems that you're trying to solve, which are data transformations, don't use loops. And then if you have a look at the framing of the problem here, you can see that immediately, oh, there's Battlestar Galactica, rewatching that from back in the day. The second one, not the first one. I'll watch the first one again on YouTube with Lorne Green. Okay, so when you have a loop, you immediately think of looping over everything. And so what you're thinking about when you're thinking about looping over an array to do something is you're thinking about having to do something to everything in the array, but that's not the best way to think about the problem. The best way to think about the problem is I have to do one simple thing to each element in the array. When you think about it like that, your problem is suddenly constrained to a single case done once after the other to each of the elements in it. And you can use array.map to do that. That constrains the complexity of the problem. Now, this one here in data transformation, the thing about data transformation is a lot of times with these problems on Stack Overflow, people are dealing with data structures that they didn't create. Other people have created them. But if you control the data structures themselves, if you find yourself writing complex code to manipulate the data structure, it's an indication that there is something wrong with the data structure. Because if you go back to Nicholas Wirth, you know, the inventor of Pascal, what did he do after that? Modular 2, then he did Oberon. Anyway, the OG of like computer science from back in the day. In the 70s, he wrote a book called Algorithms and Data Structures Equals Programs. So algorithms and data structures, your data structure that you're actually transforming. In this case, we have to say we don't have access to the original data structure. We're just dealing with it, right? So the first thing I do in writing a solution for this to refactor it is I have to mock the whole thing to know that it actually works. So I have to actually derive the data structure from the program. So if I go through this and examine it, I end up looking at it and seeing that there is books. So the books get passed in. The books is an array, and the books is an array of objects that have an ID and a name. So then I create, you know, an array of books with the objects in it, right? And I chose, just off the top of my head, religious books, the Bible, the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, the Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins, the 4 kind of greatest books of history. So the programmer is iterating over the books by getting the length and then, you know, incrementing the value of this thing and then getting this. So I created the data structure. Then what they do is they get each of the books. They get the book, they get the metadata of the book. Then they've created a new array and now they're pushing into the array. So this is another type of mutation of, like, this is a super common conflation that I've seen. Is you have some array of data that you need to do. You think that you have to do it to every one of them rather than each of them. And because you're going to return an array of other data, you create another array and now you push things into that array. You're just like multiplying the complexity. This is a perfect example of array.map. Do this function to each of the elements of this array and put the result of that into another array. Whenever you see or find yourself writing a loop with an array push inside it, it's an array map that you're doing. The machinery for array map is already built in for you. And if you want to know what it looks like, you can have a look at the array.map polyfills on MDN, the Mozilla Developer Network, to see how it's implemented. Or you can go to Lodash and have a look at Lodash's code inside there. But you don't want to write that kind of code. You just want to solve the problem. So anyway, let's run this thing. So I mocked out these two get books data and get attachments. They're both asynchronous. So I just had them return like a promise resolve, right? And then I just did a basic kind of mock of each of them. So if I run node demo.js, what time did I start? I think I might be out of time already. Anyway, I return undefined for each of them, which is the original problem, right? Now, if we go back to Stack Overflow and we see the answer that someone gave is you forgot to return your promises from the inner loop. Oh, a new update here as well. He still didn't get it though. He hasn't done the, he hasn't gotten that the loop and the array push is like way more complicated than it needs to be. So if we just do that fix that this guy, that this person has, who knows if it's a he or she or even like it could be an AI for all I know. So I don't want to make any assumptions about that. So now we're going to return this result from the inner promise. And then if I rerun the function, I get the attachments that I was expecting to get. Let's see if I can do a real fast refactor of this in the last 2 minutes of this thing. Okay, so in here, we're returning a new promise resolve. We're actually never rejecting, so we don't even need that. Okay, so we can take that out. Now it's saying if books and books.length is greater than 0, then you got this whole indented thing, right? So what you could do is you could just say if not books or not books.length is greater than that, then just return. But what are you going to return? Okay, then we'll just reject, I guess. I don't know. Depends how you want it to behave, right? But at the moment it resolves with null, which is kind of weird. So we're just gonna, this does a couple of things. It flattens the code so that you don't, if you're reading this code, you're like, oh man, like where's the, there we go. The effect of this thing is done immediately. Otherwise the effect of that thing was deferred to the very end and there was nothing there. We're forced to deal with it straight up. Someone can see if there are no books or if the books is an empty array, then we're going to reject. Now here, what we're doing is we're going to return a promise, an array. So we take the books and then we map over the books. And then for each book, we're going to do the thing. So here you have const ID and const name. One way we can do that here is we can destructure them directly in the in here. So we destructure them, they come in. Boom. So we're going to get rid of this. A promises push, promise all of those. Okay, so we destructure them into those. Now, let's do this. Get books data, name, ID. Yeah. Now then results. So with the result of that, attachment promises, object entries, results for each. I'm going to take out the key and the value. Okay, let's just reuse that code again. But even for each is the wrong thing because then you're having to mutate this thing. So again, we'll do another map. So it's going to return an array of promises. Map. Yeah, okay, so put that there. Take that off. That balances with that one. Okay, so let field name equal key, value.constructor equals array, and value length is greater than 0. Then you're going to push this into the thing. So field name, we don't even need that. We can take that out. We can get rid of that value, that reference totally. And then instead of pushing this, we just return it, right? Now, in this case, we need to put it on the same line because if you have it on a different line, it will return nothing. But what happens if this is not true? Again, we're not returning anything. So what we can do is we can make it into a ternary. So we say, return this value. If it's that, then we're going to return this promise. And if it's not that, we're going to return undefined. Move. Undefined like that. Dun, dun, dun. So in that case, we don't need that. We don't need the return statement. Good. So we have this. That goes to there. Yep, good. We can get rid of pretty much all of that. Oh, that's pretty good. Okay, we've flattened it down a lot already. So just take this out. All of that. This maps to the top. Get rid of that. Okay, so we're not going to return the whole thing first. So this object entry is get books data, then it's going to return these. So what we need to do here is some of them will be promises. Some of them will be undefined. So now we're going to filter out all of the undefined. So for that, we just go E, and then if it's undefined, take it out. That's the easiest way to do that. So we now have a map, the get books data, array. One of the things about doing these refactors like this, I'm not going to get to it by the end. I'm going to have to call it quits so I don't run over Dallas's time. Is that when you look at it, you're like, oh my God, it's so cryptic. But what you can do to make this more modular is you extract these things out into functions, right? So here what we're doing, and this is one of the things about the data structure, like what does this machine here actually do, right? I'm just going to refactor this out, this one thing, and then we'll call it quits for now. So what I'm actually doing here is I'm going over the books, I'm getting the books data. What am I doing in here? I'm getting the attachments. If it has some kind of property on it that's an array, right? So here I'll say function get attachments for book with metadata array. Let's call it that, right? You'll come up with better names for this stuff, but you know, you got to, and then here it's get books data. So here we'll call this book data. Naming is 90% of programming. If you get the names right, the code itself becomes real simple. So this is actually book data. Now, I just take this, pull it out of here, whack it into here. So here I'm going to return an array of object entries of book data. And then here I'm going to map this over. So this goes then get attachments for book with metadata array. So you can see the kind of direction I'm taking with the refactoring, right? I'm taking the implementation detail machinery out of the inline code and putting it into these small unit testable functions where, you know, the machinery of the thing is like encapsulated here, and semantically it has like a name on it where I can go back into my main function and look at it and tell by reading the code what's happening. So I map over the books, I get the data for the books. So this function is actually misnamed. It should be get book data. Get book data, or get data for book, or whatever. So export books, get book data, and then get attachments for book with metadata array. And then I'm going to do something else to that and something else to that. That might even be, I'm pretty much close to having it completely done here. But you can see I got rid of all the loops. There are now no, variables in here anymore. None. 0 variables. There are no loops. It's using array map. And then eventually I'd be able to get this all the way down to where you could get rid of this new promise here and you would return like a ternary. If it's this, I know you still have to reject at that point. No, you would return promise.reject. So in that case, I could just return a ternary, this promise.reject, and then I would return this thing here and I would chain these modifications on it. And so that is the last one of the things, which is promises. So I wrote an article about it, which is, you know, what to do about an array of, where is it? Here, Stack Overflowed. Handling failure and success in an array of asynchronous tasks. These are basically the 4 things, right? That like trip everyone up, make their programming difficult, that they're struggling with, and they all seem to get mashed together into the same problems. So people are doing the same things. They get some data structure in, they got to make some asynchronous calls, they get a data structure back, then they have to like transform that data structure and then return some kind of data structure to the caller. And you get all of these 5 things together, let versus var versus const, and just taking on the discipline of making everything a const, eliminating all variables, and then encapsulating genuine state machines in their own singularity with an immutable interface. So that's number 2. So doing that one will, you know, bring cohesion and coherence to your code, getting rid of your loops, making your data transformations properly named, and then dealing with the data structures to make them as simple and impedance matched to your use cases as possible. And then, you know, there's a lot that I could say about promises, but you can go back to the article and take a look at that. And so I'll push this thing to the GitHubs, and we'll put a link to it in the Briz.js issues. And that's what I got for you tonight. Do we have any questions, Kevin?
No, we don't as yet. You've managed to completely and thoroughly explain the subject. So thank you very, very much.
Awesome. Okay, stop sharing now and over to you. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So I will just jump without delay to Dallas Clark. Dallas is going to be giving us an Agile one-on-one, and so how you can go and be that effective Agile collaborator in your teams and your programming workforce. So I'll just let him introduce himself. Thank you very much, Dallas.
Thanks. Thanks, Kevin. I'll just set this up and make sure I get this up and running first. Okay, I assume everyone can, well, Kevin, I assume you can see my screen?
Surely can.
Surely can. Awesome. So I just wanted to cover Agile one-on-one tonight. So essentially, there's a lot of teams I still discover in software development that are not running Agile, and it's not, it may not be suitable for them, or they just may not have the discipline or essentially someone to coach them. So I'm hoping this going over Agile one-on-one will give a bit of a refresher, or spark an interest into Agile development, but also lightly discuss that Agile is not necessarily for everyone. So, but without further ado, we'll go through. So To begin with, why, is there different methodologies, different frameworks and so forth. And to begin that discussion is some software development truths. You can't gather all requirements up front. The requirements you do gather will change, and there is always more to do than time and money will allow. It's essentially the three truths of software development. And unfortunately, we face those three truths all the time with every single project. I'll just quickly cover a little bit of history of why Agile development was surfaced. So heavyweight methodologies in the past, they're most successful when the requirements are stable, technology is well known and mature, everything happens as one would expect. We are not taking on anything new or unknown, and coding is copy and paste. But unfortunately today, projects with these characteristics are far and few between. Now, waterfall development is a style of how you can apply software development. If you're not familiar with waterfall, essentially you're starting off with requirements, you go into a design phase. And so just between these two stages, you're not writing any code yet. You're gathering all the requirements together. Then you're going into a design stage. Now, design isn't necessarily UI, UX. It could also be design of the databases. It could be design of the architecture. It could be anything. Then you're finally developing. So before you can even put any code out, you've got to solve those other two previous stages. Then you go into a testing. So all the coding's been done. Let's say you're creating a whole new dashboard. You create an account interface for your company. And then you go into testing. So it's a big bang test of all the functionality you've just built. And then last of all, deployment. And that's when all the fun happens. So something you worked on could be as far as 18 months ago. You've got to try and remember how that was configured and set up all that deployment time. So you can hear how all these problems are just occurring in just simple waterfall development. But we'll note heavyweight methodologies do work in some instances, but there are high costs and the risk of using them in a dynamic environment is really high. Why did it need to change? So the reasons was too many projects were not delivered, software taking too long to get to market, requirements not met, high cost to make changes after delivery, having to get it right first time up front. That's one of the biggest problems. Too many defects when it came to testing and deployment, unhappy customers and unhappy developers was the end result. And just a simple report just showing what are some of the characteristics of why some of these projects that were using heavy methodologies were failing. And when we're talking about software development, why is it so different compared to any other industry? And the reasons are software development is not tangible. It's not something you can touch. It's not based on mathematics. And last of all, it needs knowledge workers. You really need to have people who are highly skilled. It becomes a second nature to them. But as we know, technology changes all the time. Even your employees will change all the time from a large organization. So even the product knowledge will go out the door as well. And unfortunately, as I've said a few times, riding on that sort of belief is far and few between. So why Agile? So Agile was developed, Agile came about as a reaction to the rigidity of heavyweight methods, the bureaucracy introduced by these heavyweight methods. Going through some of those stages required some pretty heavy bureaucracy from people to sign off, and gathering why they're not signing off, and could take weeks and weeks just to get a sign off on just one of those stages in waterfall. The third point is unpleasant surprises due to lack of visibility. Not having constant feedback or those feedback loops that Agile introduces, which I'll come back to later. When you've been working on something, let's say for 9 months or 12 months or 18 months, and then you give it to the customer or someone to test at the very end, that can be a huge surprise. You may have misinterpreted what the requirements were, and of course you cause some unpleasant surprises. And then last of all, the myth that a well-defined process is more valuable than the people who use it. So generally, when you get into larger organizations in particular, the person writing the requirements isn't necessarily the person who might be, working directly on the product. You do require these regular feedback loops, and that's not just with your internal team, but your external team. Get those regular feedback loops and your software development will be a whole lot smoother. The manifesto. So if you've heard of Agile development, you've probably heard that there's an Agile manifesto for Agile software development. Now, it was created in 2001 by these 17 industry leaders. You might be familiar with some of the names here. So Martin Fowler has written quite a fair few textbooks. If you looked into JavaScript, or sorry, software development in general, a few of these names might stick out to you. Jeff Sutherland is another big well-known name as well. Now, the manifesto values, these industry leaders got together and there was all these problems that were happening with software development, and they got together and their mission was to try and solve these problems. And it was a common problem from all the large organizations, from IBM to Xerox to Microsoft. And so these industry leaders from all these different organizations got together. They got together to solve this problem. Why do projects keep going over time? Why do projects have all these bugs? Why do we keep slipping and slipping and slipping? And they got together and they created this manifesto values. So you can see from here, it's all about the individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Forget the tools, forget all these processes and bureaucracy, get together, be individuals and interact. Have work in software over comprehensive documentation. Don't write all these full spec requirements. We used to write big specification documents in the past in waterfall development. Today, it's all about trying to get the work in software as soon as possible and to get that piece of work in software in front of the teams, in front of your stakeholders as soon as possible. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. Again, it's the bureaucracy stages to go through, engage with your customers, get those feedback loops. And then responding to change over following a plan. One of the biggest problems that happened with waterfall development was everyone was afraid to change the plan because it required, specification change document, or it required having to go back to the stakeholders and saying, we've gone over time and we need to change the plan, or we've now realized there's a better way to do this, or maybe 6 months into an 18-month project, technology has changed, JavaScript has changed, or there's a new module available, which this is quite common. Responding to those changes is highly important and beneficial as opposed to just following a set concrete plan. I should also note, this is where people get a bit mixed up about Agile. This manifesto doesn't tell you how to run Agile. It's just the methodologies to follow. So how you run that Agile can be different between every single team, and I'll get into that very shortly. So it's a new way of thinking about and preparing for the unanticipated. The capability to successfully affect, cope, and exploit changes in circumstances. Now, as I was mentioning, there is different Agile frameworks. There's XP for extreme programming, there's Crystal method, there's ASD, adaptive software development, there's the Scrum Agile framework, which is probably the most common, most referred to Agile frameworks. DSDM, the dynamic systems development method, and FDD, feature-driven development. So there's so many different ways you can apply Agile to your working team. I am going to pick Scrum for this discussion, but just be aware there is different Agile frameworks, and one of these frameworks or methods may work for you as opposed to Scrum. Now, as you saw, Agile Manifesto was created in 2001. However, Scrum believes, we believe that it was first initiated back in, I believe, Japan, actually, from this name, in 1986. So this appears to be the first instance of Scrum. So you can see that some of these methods or frameworks had originated before the manifesto was created. And Scrum has been one of the longest running frameworks to date. It's had some adjustments along the way, and you've probably some people may have heard of different alternatives to Scrum, but similar framework to the original Scrum framework. Now, the characteristics of running Agile with the Scrum framework. The characteristics is you're creating a self-organizing team. The product progresses in a series of 1 to 4 sprints. Requirements are captured as items in a list of what is called the product backlog. No specific engineering practices prescribed. Uses generative rules to create an Agile environment for delivering projects, and is one of the Agile processes. When you're, the way that Scrum and Agile works quite well is this is where it becomes quite effective. When you're working on a requirement and you have a simple requirement, you're close to agreement and you're close to certainty. So when you're working with your stakeholders to say, this is the requirement and this is the functionality you want to have, it's really easy to discuss that one little requirement on its own. And this is how you would work with your product backlog, is you break down your stories into individual pieces and make them as small as you possibly can. If you can look at an item and say, we can separate that in chunks, separate it in chunks. It will make it a whole lot easier to deliver, test, and get it out the door. If that one little chunk can be delivered on its own, go for it. Get it all the way up to production as soon as you possibly can and get some feedback loops on that. When you start moving away from having a simple requirement and go into complicated requirements, you're starting to get further away from that ability to be close to that agreement and close to certainty. So this is when you need to start to buffer in some unknowns. So if you're starting to work on something that the team is not familiar with, or it's a new technology or anything like that, you need to start to buffer into some of those unknowns, and you get far from that agreement of the requirement, and the technology is not as close to certainty. Ideally, keep them simple. Don't even fall into the complicated. The next step is complex. So complex technology. Generally, you don't want to go this far at all. And of course, you got your anarchy. Don't even get to this point. If you're working on something that is just far from certainty and far from agreement, I mean, this should never even happen within your project. Your sprints. So within a Scrum project, you have you make a progress in what is called a sprint. And the typical duration of a sprint is 1 to 4 weeks, or a calendar month at the most is what is recommended. A constant duration leads to a better rhythm, and product is designed, coded, and tested within one sprint. So the goal of a sprint is you create your sprint backlog. So you have an initial goal, and this initial goal might be creating a dashboard for your My Account on your application. So the goal of the sprint is let's build a dashboard from My Account in your product. Create your sprint backlog. You then iterate over those jobs to create that dashboard over the 1 to 4 weeks period. But every 24 hours, you touch in with your developers and the testing team and your analysts and anyone who's part of your Agile team on a daily basis, on every working day, every 24 hours. And then that's what is referred to as the stand-up. So you're having that constant feedback loop with the developers and testers and analysts to find out what everyone's working on from the previous day, what they're working on today, and particularly any blockers. This constant feedback loop with everyone in the team makes it smoother and easier to get through to get to that end goal for that particular sprint. At the end of your sprint, preferably have a shippable product increment. So if you're able to have a piece of your product shipped to production, great. That's the ultimate goal for every single sprint. Some pieces of functionality, like if you are building a dashboard and you know it's going to take 2 sprints, then yes, of course, you're going to have to release after the second sprint. But ideally you want to break down your features as much as possible to get down to that potentially shippable product at the end of every single sprint. And if you nail this quite well, you can potentially ship every single day. So you're having your continuous integration tools or your deployment tools to potentially have this shipped every single day. So as soon as the item has been tested and it's gone through all the code reviews and it's gone through any other checks you may have in place, get it out to production. There's no reason to stop it other than you might have contract negotiations or anything like that. What generally happens over a course of a sprint, as I was saying earlier, you do everything within that sprint. So you have your planning and you do just enough planning before the sprint starts. But during the sprint, you can gather all your requirements that you need to perform this particular job. You may have design done within this particular job. You're definitely going to write the code within this particular job for the sprint. And then last of all, you got your testing. And generally your flow will occur like this. The pink line refers to the requirements happening up front, green line for design, red for code, and blue for test. This may not be the solution that works well for your team. You may require to have all the requirements and designs up front by a different team. And that can happen across different organizations. And your team only does the coding and testing. In that case, you would want to have all the requirements and design done up front, and you implement the code and do all the testing within your sprint. And then at the end of that, you have your shippable product, potentially shippable product. So generally, some people will ask, well, how long should your sprint last for? So as I mentioned, 1 to 4 weeks is preferable, with the calendar month as the last exception. But what you want to do is plan the sprint durations around how long you can commit to keeping change out of the sprint. So what that means is, like, how long can you commit with your stakeholders and say, this is what we're going to work on for this entire sprint. The longer you go for, the harder it is to estimate what that actually is. And because you generally want to avoid changes within that sprint. You want to come to an agreement of what the goal is, and then you all work very, you're very narrow-minded on achieving that particular goal. So changing the sprint at all is generally frowned upon, but of course you got to also be agile and adapt it as well. But general rule, if you can go for 2 weeks without having to change the sprint, then maybe 2 weeks is the perfect answer. But if 3 weeks is starting to get onto that borderline of, okay, marketing might come in with new changes, or product team might come in with new changes, or you deal with support tickets and that can affect your sprints. There's many different reasons. So find your happy spot. Normally, most teams I know will go for the 2 week mark. So part of an agile team is you will have a product owner. Now, the product owner is, some people will refer to as like the mini CEO within the company. It's the CEO of this particular product. They define the features of the product. They decide on the release date and content with involving all the stakeholders. They're responsible for the profitability of the product, which is, to some product owners, is a little bit of a surprise. But at the end of the day, the company is there making a product that they need a profit on. And regardless if you're not for profit or not, that's generally the common rule across any organization. You do need to make some sort of money or some sort of return, if it's not directly money, on that particular product. Prioritize features according to market value. You don't want to be working on something, let's say you're spending 20 hours on the footer, whereas opposed you could spend 2 hours on a new banner at the top of the homepage that's going to create a lot more sales. You got to prioritize. That's the role of the product owner, is to recognize how to prioritize all these incoming requests. Adjust features and priority every iteration as needed. Every single sprint, you're going to be constantly changing, what the goals are, and constantly changing the product. And accept or reject work results. So even ideas, accepting and rejecting them, and then even at the end of a sprint, the product owner has the power to actually reject a feature or say, no, we're not going to put that into production. That can happen, but of course that usually won't. That's a rare case. Scrum Master. Now, Scrum Master within the Scrum framework is the person who represents management to the project. They keep the wheels in motion. They're responsible for enacting Scrum values and practices. So they're essentially a bit of a mini coach within the team. They remove impediments. So if there's anything blocking the team, they're responsible to try and remove that problem for the rest of the team. They will have to go out and talk to other teams if needed, but they try and keep the noise away from the team so that the team can focus. Ensure that the team is fully functional and productive. It goes pretty much with my last comment. Enable close cooperation across all roles and functions. They're the ones who, as I said, they keep the project management, they keep everyone being proactive and working together quite well. And they shield the team from external interferences. That's quite important because generally, when you're in an organization, it's quite easy for someone to come and talk to you or bring in a new problem or bring in anything. So generally the Scrum Master will be that buffer between you and the outside world and keeps you all focused on achieving the goal. I will mention though, like, don't take this literally. Any of this, like be agile, you got to adapt to what your work environment requires. I've seen someone actually take it literally and say, no, my Scrum Master said, no, I will not support you. And then that was someone who was talking to a much further up manager. Please take it with a grain of salt and adapt to these frameworks and methods to suit your work practice. Then the rest of the team. I've mentioned there's a product owner and a Scrum Master, but then I'm referring to the rest of the team as just being the team, and I'll come into the reason why. So typically the team, you would have 5 to 9 people. Anything more than 9 people becomes hard to manage. You become quite an organization within the organization, and the more people you throw at something can become a lot more complicated. Generally, you want to be cross-functional. If you require testers, you must have testers. If you require a designer because you always have design work every single sprint, then you should have a designer within your team. Members should be full-time to the team, and teams are self-organizing, and the team should only change between sprints. So referring to, like, if you want one member to be part of a team for 4 sprints and then move them to another team, don't do that change mid-sprint. Do it at the end of a sprint when the goal has been achieved and completed, then that person can move. Some people prefer to do holidays across the whole sprint to avoid disrupting the team so much. This is a typical agile team. You got the product owner and the Scrum Master, you got the developers and the testers. This is quite a typical team. Some teams may not be too large or large enough to really have a Scrum Master. So sometimes it's a good idea for the Scrum Master role to be passed around, or someone just has that as a bit of a side responsibility whilst they are a developer or tester. That is possible as well. Now, you may need to have the requirement, as I mentioned, that you need to have analysts and designers. So I've worked in government organizations that have dealt with very complicated mathematics and financial rules that required someone who actually knows the law and the tax codes quite well. So every single thing that we wrote had to be tested right down to the fine-grained detail. So we required 3 analysts within our team. That's a rare case though, but it's just something that you will have to do for an organization like that I've worked with in the past. And I've been in a circumstance where I've had a designer on the team, and that was simply because we were working on front UI changes all the time, and we were dedicated to the marketing team. And there was constant design work all the time. How your team will look can differ between every organization. So again, have a look at how your team should be adopting Agile and the Scrum framework. And work it between sprint to sprint, find what works well and what doesn't. Sorry, I just got trigger happy. Part of the Scrum framework is what they call these ceremonies. So backlog grooming is the product owner and the rest of the team get together and they go through the requirements and they work out the uncertainties. And if you have any questions at the end of discussing the job, you've got to answer those questions, and you don't put it into a sprint until every single uncertainty has been resolved. Sprint planning. Generally, you would like to get into sprint planning and it runs for 5 minutes. Again, this is very far from what actually really happens. But if everything is groomed and ready to go, and you know how many points you work on as you get into sprint planning, let's say you work on, say, 50 points for your team, essentially you should be able to go, yep, we'll do that job, that job, that job, and then all agree, everyone says yes, and away you go. History or experience shows that 5 minutes is pretty rare. I think the closest I've ever had is 10 to 12 minutes, something like that. But usually, I've experienced sprint planning go for half an hour to an hour. But essentially, you all get together, you work out what's going to be in the next sprint, and you all agree to it. I won't go over this because I'm just conscious of time. I am hitting that 20-minute mark. Another ceremony is the sprint review. This is really good, not only to involve the stakeholders to show what you have worked on, but this actually is really good morale for the developers and will bring forward their spirits quite a lot if they get to actually show their work and demonstrate it. What I really recommend for developers is to have a bit of a story to talk about this feature. Everyone will see one button appear on their screen, but they don't know the story behind it of how that button got there. So this is a really good opportunity for developers to bring forward some of the difficulty, difficult hurdles that they had to get over to achieve that one button to appear on the dashboard or anything like that. Sprint reviews, share the work. Not every developer in the team is going to know what another developer has worked on. So it's great for your internal team, great for the stakeholders, and just it boosts morale and shows it's a bit of great demo to have across the board. As the last note says, invite everyone. Bring everyone to the table and show them. It's a really good opportunity. Retrospective. Now, this is when I was talking about earlier, where every single sprint, you look back at your previous sprint and you work out what went well. It's particularly what went well. A lot of people overlook that and they don't consider what really went well. Bring forward what didn't work well, and what you also longed for, like what's something that you may have wished for to occur within the sprint. Whole team participates, possibly customers and others. Like if you've got an internal customer, they may want to come in and show, and tell you how it actually worked really well for them with this particular sprint. So if you work really closely with the marketing department or you work really closely with some other department in your business, you may want to introduce them as, if they were heavily involved in your sprint, you may want to introduce them to your retro, but generally you would perform it within just your team. I want to just, one ceremony I will go into is the sprint retro. So generally what you want to discuss is what I liked, what I longed for, and what I disliked. So bring forward everything that you did like. What I longed for, be creative. If someone says, I really need a holiday, bring that forward. Everything is, it's a safe environment for everyone to bring everything forward. What I disliked, one recommendation I can give here is don't attack individuals and mention a behavior. So if one individual, let's say Dallas, keeps being late to stand up, then maybe write down starting stand up late, but don't attack an individual. Don't say Dallas is always late to stand up. Really big tip there, so you don't get on the wrong side in these sort of circumstances. But it should be a safe environment. You should be able to bring forward what you think. But as I said, bring forward the behavior, not the individual. If continuous integration instability was a big problem, bring that forward. That's a big concern. And that's something that someone like the Scrum Master can follow up with, DevOps team or infrastructure team or whoever might be involved. Or it becomes something you look at in the next sprint. It becomes a goal in the next sprint that you look at. And then you create actions for you all to follow up on based on what you just discussed over those previous 3 columns. Really important, create these actions and assign it to someone. Someone needs to be responsible to do this. You may have one where the whole team needs to participate, like everyone's late for stand-up. So you assign that sort of thing to the whole team, but make sure you assign these sort of things to an individual. Now, we'll note this is one way to run retro. There is so many ways to run retro out there. And one good thing I would recommend is if retrospectives become stale, let's say you have 3 members not participating, it's always the same people writing the same answers, change it up, change the retro, create a theme like Santa Claus, where someone could put on a Christmas hat and says, all right, I'm Santa Claus, tell me what all your wishes are. You don't talk about what went wrong, you just get everyone to bring forward their wishes and reframe it that way. So if you can see it's getting stale, change it up, change the way you deliver it, and keep people on their toes. Last of all, through my organization, which is Tiny, we've written a lot about culture and with developers and the environment. Agile's been one thing that we've been focused on quite a lot recently. So please reach out to tiny.cloud/blog if you want to read more. And you can go, and please don't hesitate to reach out for me if you've got any questions. That's my talk.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. We do have a couple of questions. Let me just move over to them and turn my video on so people don't get my lovely name popping up over your face. Cool. So let me just move to it. Great. Okay. Oh, we still got one left over here for Josh, just saying not a question, just a thank you for some great info. That's good. Thank you very much. There's one in here saying, can you tell us more about the crystal method of Agile? I guess that one hadn't been heard before.
To be honest, I'm very familiar with Scrum, and I'm pretty biased with Scrum, to be honest. But Crystal is an Agile framework focusing on individuals and their interactions, as opposed to processes and tools. So in other words, this framework is a direct outgrowth of one of the core values. I just read that from the notes I've written on that particular slide, I will admit. And I will admit, I don't know anything other than just a blurb about it. So do a Google search for Agile Crystal, and I'm sure you'll find an answer for that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Is continuous integration essential to Agile development?
Continuous integration. Yes and no. It will help. You don't need to have CI tools or CD tools to be Agile. You can start an Agile team, do everything manually tested, and have those manual gates for code review, manual testing, then manual deployments. You'll still be Agile. It will, however, speed up the process and make it easier to not repeat some of those tasks again and again and again and again. So yes and no, it will definitely help, but no, you don't need to.
Okay. Tick. What are some of the ways a Scrum Master facilitates in an Agile way during a sprint? So I'm assuming how they get involved and how they go and do their communication within the team. Yeah,
so it's all about bringing those manifesto values back. If they start to see bureaucracy being introduced, or they start to see like too much documentation, or they start, you start to see that team, moving away from, those true values of Agile. They bring the team back on track. They also make sure that the goal's on track. There's what they call a velocity burn down chart. They will continuously look at that chart and make sure that by the end of the 2 weeks, you're going to have all those jobs completed by the end of that sprint, or 1 week or 4 weeks, whatever the sprint length is. If you're not going to achieve it, the Scrum Master may need to talk to other stakeholders to work out what can be delivered by the end of this sprint and what is not so important that they can defer to the next sprint. So between the product owner and say external stakeholders, I'll generally work that sort of solution out. Again, they're the project management for that particular sprint, and they will keep the noise away from the developers. So if the developer's working on feature A and it's not going to be done, but there's some fluff in that feature A that doesn't have to be done, they'll work out with the external stakeholders and negotiate and do all that without the developer. Unless it's something that's really, really complex and complicated and only that developer can describe it. Again, yeah, don't take these things literally. Be agile, adapt to change.
Cool. All right. Last one is there. Wouldn't you agree that all people involved in the work should be on the team and dedicated to it, or not? Question mark.
I'll read that. Wouldn't you agree that all people involved in the work should be on the team and dedicated to it? Yeah. No, because right, for instance, like a UI designer might create some components to be reused across all the products, not just a product team, but there could be 10 product teams, but they all use the same UI. And this designer, it's not a full-time job to create a button for one team and then create the exact same button for another team and that exact same button for another team. So resources like that would be shared. I can tell you from actually Auto in General, previously working with Auto in General, company behind Budget Direct. So there's 10 major product teams there, and there was between times 2 to 3 designers across all those products. And the work was enough for 2 or 3 of them to tackle. The example I gave in the talk, as I mentioned about laws and tax codes, if you read between the lines, you can probably work out that it's probably government, and there's one government agency that's involved. But we required 3 analysts for that, and that was for a particular product for that government organization. And they had to know the tax codes inside and out for that particular product. So you don't want any more than 9 people. You have just enough. And what just enough is, I can't answer that. It's something you will have to trial. You don't want to bring in 9 people and work out 9's not great and then have to move people. Just bring it in gradually is probably the biggest tip.
That's awesome. Thanks so much for answering those questions, and thanks so much for your presentation. And thanks to everyone, all of our speakers tonight. And thanks to you guys watching at home, everyone in the audience. Thanks, folks. And I will just switch over to a quick screen share. Now, I alluded that we had a new sponsor, and this sponsor is actually Wallaby.js. Wallaby.js has gone and said, well, we would like to give away some licenses to our awesome software developer productivity tools. You may have come across Wallaby.js or Quokka.js before. If not, go and check out their links there. Essentially, it will go and run, so Wallaby will run your tests as you type and display results next to your code, which is pretty cool. It's going, so as in that example there in my streaming, it's got error not implemented. And then it will also do evaluation on each line as well. So you can go and see what something would be, which is the highlight of Quokka.js. So we're giving away a Quokka.js license tonight. And the question I've put up there in the poll inside Slido is, what was Ashley Davis saying about the size of the Babel AST output? And if you answer that question, put your full name and email address in there. I will random pick somebody from that pool. So you got to get the correct answer right. And then for the correct answers, I will have picked somebody from there. So you can answer that now in Slido. That poll is running. I will alternate between that. I'll go and put up the rating poll now that we've finished our presentations for the night, just so you can give us some feedback about the meetup. and leave any suggestions open there. And then after that's closed, I will go through and just leave the giveaway poll open for the rest of the evening. Yeah, it'll be closed by tomorrow morning. And then I'll get in touch with the lucky winner. Thanks, everyone. I'll just close that screen sharing, and thanks to Quokka to Wallaby for going and contributing those licenses. What I will just do now is jump onto, no, I won't. All good. I would just love to thank all of our presenters tonight again. Without you guys, it would not have happened, and I really appreciate all the effort you've gone to. Thank you very much for in-depth questions there as well, and being able to give feedback. If anyone has any more questions, feel free to reach out to me, and I can jump on and send those bits of feedback to all our presenters. Otherwise, please check out our GitHub. GitHub, you can interact with some of the speakers through that and see any resources that have been shared. So we'll, if there's nothing up there, do get in touch with me. We'll make sure that you can get your questions answered. Twitter is also a great forum for that kind of thing as well. Yeah, hopefully we can get more of your feedback, get that participation thing going that you might be missing out on for the real life venue. Yeah, thank you very much, everyone. I will just flick this to our last slide and leave that up for everyone. 1 second. There we go. That will be it. So without further ado, I'll sign off, say goodnight, and feel free to go and have a look at those polls. You know, you can ask any more questions, and those will be collated and collected by the app. You can also go and enter in for that Quokka.js license. And thank you very much, everyone. We'll see you next month. Do remember to contribute some talks if you can. I'm always looking for speakers, and I definitely I'm keen for some red hot speakers for next month. So yeah, if you're a bit afraid of that, feel free to get in touch anyway. We'll try and give you some coaching. We'll put you in touch with some of these expert folks that have presented over the last few months as well. They can hopefully give you some support there as well. So, all right, signing off. Thank you everyone for watching the stream. See ya.
Thanks, Kevin.